as you know, the fires which have been raging for some time, thankfully a little better in New South Wales and a little better in Queensland. That said, a little later we'll talk to somebody who sadly lost all of their possessions. But it does give us a chance, and I've said this all the way through, that during the emergency phase of this, I'm not going to talk about this stuff, I'm not going to entertain it, but now that we're sort of through that for now, apparently going to come back next week, it is worth talking about and start to pull away. Is it true or not true that hazard reduction is not happening at the levels that it used to in national parks? Now, there's an interesting way into this conversation where we've basically got a fight inside the New South Wales government for everyone to see. The Deputy Premier says that hazard reduction hasn't been happening enough, and the Environment Minister says, I won't have my rangers in the national parks insulted like that. And then there's a third part, which is, to me, the most interesting. The claim from the union that represents the workers who are the park rangers, whose responsibility it is to carry out the hazard reduction, well, they came out this week and said, there's less of us than there used to be. Why? Because of budget cuts. Essentially, there are fewer physical human beings to carry out that hazard reduction than they were a couple or even a few years ago. To that point, I had a conversation with Tony Wright from the PSA in Sydney a bit earlier today.
I can categorically state, Paul, that there are less. Categorically state. We have the government's own numbers. The government's own numbers. And I can tell you that in 2011, there were 289 park rangers. That included 28 senior rangers. Last year, there are 193. This year, slightly up to 201. I think the government's trying to play fuzzy maths on this. It doesn't make sense what they've said in Parliament yesterday. Either the Premier was misinformed or being slightly misleading. But they are definitely, without a doubt, based on their own correspondence internally, this is an email dated internally on the 19th of August this year, which gives the numbers of rangers right across the state at that moment for the last 8 years. And they are down. They are down from 289 to currently 201.
Something that has been a little hard for people outside of all of this world to understand is that there's a lot of overlapping responsibilities where the basic assumption is, obviously, a park ranger is in charge of a national park, the metropolitan area is the main fire brigade, and the entire rest of the state, with all of its complications, is the rural fire service. Is there anyone else who's involved in the control of hazard reductions in national parkland in metropolitan Sydney?
Right across the state, the responsibility for hazard reduction in national parks is that of the National Parks and Wildlife Service. And if you don't have the rangers and you don't have the fire management officers and you don't have the area managers to coordinate that, it cannot occur. There are two reasons why hazard reduction doesn't occur sufficiently in national parks. One is the weather and conditions. Obviously, that's beyond the government's control. The second is resourcing. And we have been raising this with them for years, since they proposed this restructure approximately 18 months to 2 years ago, that there would be inadequate resources on the ground to perform hazard reduction in national parks. And we are currently seeing the fruit of that restructure, unfortunately.
So, again, we're getting into sort of the bureaucracy, but this is important for people to know, and this is why we're taking a little time to talk to you here. When you say restructure, people's titles changed, numbers of people changed, or control changed. How did this all come about?
Yeah, all of the above. The government cut the budget of the National Parks and Wildlife Service in 2017-18 by $121 million. In doing so, 778 jobs were either lost or restructured or changed or altered or reduced. Included in that was a number of rangers. Included in that, and most concerningly for us, isn't just the rangers. It's there's a position, basically there were branches or regions of the National Parks and Wildlife Service across the state. There were 38. Every single region had a fire management officer. That person's job was to coordinate hazard reduction, organise it, be aware of it, and have knowledge of the topography, the weather, the fire behaviour in that region. They've reduced the number of regions from 38 to a mere 8 branches, and in doing so reduced those fire management officers down to 10. There are 10 people responsible in the entire state of New South Wales for fire management programs in national parks. There is one member that we have in our union that has the size of Tasmania to coordinate. It's ridiculous. And I'm glad you started by saying it's confusing because, look, we're very close to the action. We receive all the information from our members. We receive documents like this. But I'm still confused about what occurred at Parliament yesterday. As you said, part of the government's arguing that there's increased hazard reduction, part of their government's arguing that there's less. We can't follow the argument, and it seems to be completely inconsistent even from the government. What we know, there are significant less resources in the National Parks and Wildlife Service, and as a result, there's significant less hazard reduction activity.
But also, the more and more I read into this and bushfire management or anything else from multiple angles, it feels like the complication, the overlap, is all part of the strategy to be able to hide either a reduction in resourcing, as you're talking about, or a reduction in a will to do something due to environmental factors or all of those other different things that start to come up. I appreciate you giving us some hard facts on all of this. No doubt the government will want to push back and we'll hear from them a bit later. But thank you so much and I appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me on, Paul.